Okay, so this is the second video that's still going to be considered sort of an overview. In this one, I'm going to take all of the pathways, pretty much all the pathways that you're going to be covering throughout the entire quarter, and kind of put them together so that you can already see a big picture of it, as well as try to just kind of break down some of the words, because as you can see, they look very similar. So we've got gla, 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 gla. We've got all these words that sound very similar. They also sound like glucose or glucagon, which have nothing to do with the name of a pathway, but instead factors in a pathway. So in all these pathways, there's a bunch of other enzymes and substrates or products that also sound the same way. So a big part of playing this game is just about being able to break a word down. So for example, let's take glycogenesis. So glyco for glycogen, well, even the whole word even says glycogen in it. So we've got glycogen, and then the second half of that is genesis, which means the beginning of or creation of. So glycogenesis, that pathway is telling you that we're going to be making glycogen, versus the opposite, or the reciprocal pathway. Again, break down the name. We can see glycogen and then lysis. So lysis means to break, so breaking down glycogen. And the reason I wrote these pathways up here together and in different colors is so that you can just see, go ahead and start to associate glycolysis, the opposite of that pathway, gluconeogenesis. Then we have glycogenesis, the opposite of that pathway, glycogenolysis. Lipogenesis, lipolysis. So you're already starting to associate some of these terms and big picture things together. What these are called then, when you're comparing one to the other, they're called reciprocal pathways. And one reason why we have to regulate pathways is so that we avoid making something at the same time that we're breaking something down. That doesn't make any sense at all. And so that's back to the first video when we talked a little bit about regulation and how and why things are regulated. That's partly why, is to control these reciprocal pathways from going on at the same time. When they go on at the same time, well, they don't in a properly functioning metabolic state, but if they do, that's known as the futile state. So one way to avoid the futile state is to have these rate-limiting enzymes, or the intracellular and extracellular regulators. So this is the word form of all these things, but I'm going to kind of draw on this side a little bit of a visual of these sort of things. The first real topic when you actually get into this quarter's information in terms of like diving into a pathway, you're going to start here with glycogen. But in my explanation here, I want to talk more about what the body's doing when you've eaten something. Step 1 after you eat, step 2 after you eat, all that kind of stuff. And then big picture. And then the opposite of that side of, okay, let's say you've been 3, 5, 6 hours without a meal, now what happens first, second, third? So, and that all centers around your pathways. So if we've just had a meal, then, I think this is easier to see. If we've just had a meal, I'm going to call it the fed versus the fasted state. So if we're fed, we're in the fed state. The first thing that's going to happen is going to be glycolysis. Glycolysis, which is then going to feed into the TCA cycle, which is then going to feed into the electron transport chain. The point of this is to get energy quickly from our food, get it in the form of ATP and ADH, and so that we've replenished our energy stores for our brain function, for our red blood cells, the things that never shut off. Once we have enough food from that, so that's first, or enough food from that. Once we have enough energy from that, the next thing that the body says is, okay, we've got enough ATP, we've got enough energy, things are supplied there. So the second thing that's going to do is the glycogenesis. I notoriously spell these wrong, so you know what it is. Glycogenesis. So the first step, get quick energy from our food. Second step, store a little bit. Store some in the liver and some in the skeletal muscle, nowhere else. We store 100 grams in the liver and 400 grams in the skeletal muscle, so 500 grams total. That's just to get us between meals. It doesn't last too long. It lasts you for most of the night. You wake up, you need to eat breakfast, otherwise your body is breaking down its third thing that it's going to do. I started going on the wrong track there. Hold that thought, we'll come back to that, because we're talking about the fed state. So the third thing that it's going to do when you've had a meal, and if you still have ample energy, the third thing that your body's going to do with that is that you're going to start to build proteins. So I'm just going to write amino acids here. And then you're going to start building your lipids, so lipogenesis. So that's kind of the overview of the order of these things. These other minor pathways, making your glucuronate, I wrote that twice. Don't learn more than you need to. So the other things that are going on here, PPP pathway, making your glucuronate, making all these other little things, building your phospholipids, your cholesterol, your steroid hormones, all that. That's all fitting into this model as well, but I'm just staying really broad picture with your biggies, your big topics here. So, overview of that. When we've had a meal, the body first does glycolysis, TCA cycle, electron transport chain to get quick energy from that. Then we have enough energy left over from our food that we go and we store some in the form of glycogen. Then the body says, okay, we still have enough. We're going to start making some proteins, start replenishing our skeletal muscle, making enzymes with these proteins, because enzymes are proteins. And then after that, if we still have enough, that's when the body stores fat. So then the opposite side of that, if we're in a fasted state, and I'm not talking, what a lot of people think of with fasting, like days on end, just your hungry state, your overnight waking up in the morning state. So now I'm returning to that earlier thought. So the first thing that's going to be starting to get broken down then, so this is like saying, okay, I had breakfast, now I'm sitting in one of these classes, and I'm really hungry, it's 11:30, your lunch break's not till 1 o'clock, so you're breaking into your glycogen stores. So thankfully you've had food the night before, or you had food enough in the morning that your body can start breaking down your glycogen, otherwise it's going to break down your proteins. So step one, glycogen. Glycogenolysis. Again, break down the word, lysis. So now we're breaking it down. Step two, we're going to start breaking into those proteins, amino acids, which is going to be, we're breaking down our proteins and our amino acids to facilitate the pathway called gluconeogenesis. So I'm just going to write that here too. So let's talk about that word for a second. Glycolysis is one of those things that we're breaking down glucose down to pyruvate. But if we need to get back up to glucose, there are 3 rate-limiting enzymes in that pathway that have to be bypassed to get back up to glucose. So then glucose goes to other cells of the body so that they can make energy from the glucose. So gluconeogenesis is glucose from new sources. So it's glucose being made anew from non-carbohydrate precursors. That's why I put it under amino acids, because as your protein starts to get broken down, your skeletal muscle, and releases those amino acids, they feed into the carb central metabolism so that you can go back up to glucose, because glucose is sort of your center of, it's like your common denominator of energy for the cells. So we need to get back up to glucose to then go, the liver makes the glucose, so then it goes to other cells so that they have energy through glycolysis with that glucose. That makes sense. Okay, so we're hungry. We've broken down our glycogen stores. There wasn't very much. We've broken down some of our skeletal muscle, but our body is smart and it knows that we don't want to break down too much of our muscle. So it doesn't do this for too long before it kicks into proteins. So then we have lipolysis. So just kind of a big, broad picture. I keep getting sort of detailed with little tracks, but I'm trying to stay very broad picture here of sort of just the order of these things. So when we're fed, glycolysis glycolysis, TCA, ETC, then glycogenesis, then restores your amino acids, then makes your fats. When we're hungry, first glycogenolysis, breaking down the storage form, then we're going to break into our proteins, and then lipolysis, breaking into our fats. So, one fourth layer I will add here is that if your body continues to not, one, get any food from the meal sources, exogenous sources of energy, or two, doesn't recognize those forms because the body, like I said, the common language is through glucose. So glucose is a carb, so that's, if the body is not receiving carbohydrates, it's kind of tricked into thinking that it's not receiving fuel at all. And so it will continue in this fasted state despite being able to get fed, which is the whole idea behind the keto diet. And the keto diet is the controlled version of step 4 here, which is going to be ketones. Your ketone bodies, ketogenesis. The uncontrolled version of this will happen in, for example, a diabetic who is not controlling that, and their body cannot sense that there's glucose in the plasma. It can't actually get that into the cell. And so the body is tricked into thinking that there is no glucose, and so we're at step 3, and then step 4 will occur in order to counteract the fact that it doesn't think it has glucose. Ketones and glucose have a very similar structure, and ketones can go where glucose goes. So it's fine, it can work. There's a lot of interesting research here if that's something you're interested in. But yeah, just know that that's kind of the last ditch effort for the body of maintaining that homeostasis to get energy to your brain cells, your neurons, your red blood cells, your adrenal glands, the sex glands, all that stuff that needs a lot of energy. That probably does it for the pathway overview, and the next video will be going into our first 2 pathways, which I'll pair together because I'm big on why learn 2 things when you can learn 1, why learn 8 when you can learn 4, and these are very, very similar. They're flip mirror images of each other for the most part, so we'll go there next.